So just want to make sure everyone is aware of that. So we'll hold off another 30 seconds or so. It looks like everyone is on, so we'll go ahead and get started. As I mentioned, Rosie McCool with the Chief Probation Officers of California, very excited to be with you all this afternoon and to have this very informative workshop. We know there are a lot of questions around the separation of youth and juvenile facilities and what we can do and cannot do. And so very excited to have Allison Ganter, who is the Deputy Director and with the Facilities and Standards and Operations Division and Research with the BSCC, here with us this afternoon and giving us her time. And also want to note that Ginger Wolf and Tamika Shedwin, who are part of the compliance monitoring team with the BSCC, are also with us this afternoon. So before we get started, I also wanted to thank those of you who may have sent scenarios over to CPOC that we could forward over to the BSCC in preparation for this presentation. So do thank all of you for doing so. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started because I know that there are a lot of questions that folks have. So with that, Allison, I will turn it over to you. I got two housekeeping items. One, we will be sending materials post this workshop because I know that's always a question that folks have. So we will send that out to everyone post the, so either this afternoon or on Monday. And then also we intend to have time after the presentation to have a lot of dialogue, Q&A, so that hopefully as many of your questions can get answered as possible. So with those two items done and taken care of, Allison, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rosie. Good afternoon, everybody. As Rosie said, I'm Allison Ganter with the BSCC, and I just wanted to introduce my colleagues, Ginger Wolf and Tamika Shedwin. They're joining me here today. I'll explain a little bit about our compliance monitoring team, but both Ginger and Tamika are managers on that team and do the work that we're going to talk about here today. So thank you to Ginger and Tamika for joining us here today. Thanks for spending your afternoon with us. I know this is what everybody wants to talk about on Friday. We're going to be talking about separation in juvenile facilities. And hopefully everybody can see my screen. Somebody can holler if it looks weird. The things that we are going to talk about today are as follows. Welcome and introductions. We took care of that part. So far we're on track. We're going to talk about the BSCC role in federal compliance monitoring. We're going to talk about the JJRA, also known as the JJDPA, the federal core requirements. Talk a little bit about the state and federal laws that apply to separation in juvenile facilities. We're going to talk about terminology. What is separation? What is an adult inmate? Hopefully by the end of this, you'll be able to, repeat very clearly, as clear as federal laws can be, what those terms are and what they mean. There's one exception that many of you have experienced. We'll talk about that as well. And again, hopefully at the end of this, you'll understand when separation is required in your facilities. And we also have about 13 scenarios to walk through. Thank you so much to those of you that submitted some information. The bulk of the time, I think, will be spent going over those scenarios. And I'll invite anybody that wants to join in or read their scenario, talk about their scenario when we get to that point. Just check in to see if there's any questions before we begin.
I don't see anything in the chat, so I think we're good.
Okay, all right. So very quickly, you know us mostly as facility inspectors. Very quick overview of our main roles at the BSCC. We do the facility inspections for Title 15 and 24. We do plan review for construction. We also do regulation revisions, and I added in a shameless plug because we are deep into the preparation for the regulation revision ESC happening on November 2nd and 3rd. So just a little shameless plug there. But another role of ours is federal compliance monitoring, and that's related to the federal Title II grant funds. We're going to focus on that today. You'll hear me say several times that, and this is unusual for a state agency, in this compliance monitoring role, we are dealing with federal laws. not state laws, which is what we typically deal with in your facilities. So I'll say that a lot. Those of us that have worked with the federal JJDPA, you really do have to switch on and off the state and federal parts of your brain, because it does get murky at times. So why do we do federal compliance monitoring? Because BSCC is the designated state agency for monitoring, receiving and distributing the Title II funds for local juvenile justice and delinquency prevention. We have information on our website. I can send you the link to that. Some of you might be receiving those Title II funds. For California to continue to receive those Title II funds, we have to conduct compliance monitoring according to the federal JJDPA. We also collect lots and lots of data on compliance monitoring and submit it annually to the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. Every single state in the nation, I think with the exception of Wisconsin, although they might have changed their mind, receives those Title II funds and does the same similar versions of compliance monitoring in their states as well. So if you move to another state and worked in a juvenile detention facility, you'd be dealing with federal compliance monitoring almost the same way as we do here in California. So our field representatives, again, they're typically coming into your facilities and doing the inspections for compliance of Title 15 and Title 24, which are the state regulations, but they also conduct compliance monitoring at the very end of our checklist, which I know you know by heart, each and every one of you. At the end of our checklist are a couple questions related to separation and status offenders. And that's how our team is doing compliance monitoring in your facilities. We also have compliance monitors that work at the BSCC that do monitoring in police departments only. I won't get too much into that, but if you ever hear the term compliance monitoring or compliance monitor, just know that it's related to the federal core requirements. So what are the federal JJDPA core requirements? And I apologize for the JJDPA and the JJRA are the same thing in this context. So there's 4 of them. Remember I said the state has to be compliant with these 4 to continue to receive the Title II funding for juvenile justice and delinquency prevention. So really quickly, deinstitutionalization of status offenders, that's keeping status offenders out of detention. There's jail removal. That's a young person cannot be held in custody more than 6 hours after their arrest in an adult police lockup. Separation, which we're here to talk about today, and racial and ethnic disparities, also known as RED. So the 4 of these core requirements, the 2 that apply as far as compliance monitoring to juvenile detention facilities are DSO, the deinstitutionalization of status offenders, and separation, adult jail and lockup removal. Go figure, applies to adult jails. So again, we're going to be focusing on separation here today. And as you know, there are several state laws that also apply to separation. And with status offenders, there are state laws that support and supplement the federal core requirements. Some are really easy and align perfectly with the federal law, but just for fun, many of them conflict or supersede some of the federal laws. So when I say we really have to suspend our work in state law, when our team talks about federal law, it's because they can be really confusing. We're gonna try and do our best to stay focused on those federal laws. Because again, unlike other tasks, we're required to monitor for federal laws, and we are not the agency or an agency that monitors for state laws. State regulations, yes. State laws like the Welfare and Institution Code, we do not monitor for. We realize with the advent of and with the passage of SB 823, we've been talking about separation a lot more. So we really want to just remind everybody that we are seeing the same frustrations and issues out there as you are, and we really want to remain a resource. So keep those questions coming, and we're going to do our best to stay on top of those. So just an overview. This is pretty simple. There's a lot of laws related to separation and age and those types of things. But California Welfare and Institutions Code 208 prohibits contact between minors and adults with limited exceptions. It's pretty simple. Doesn't get into who's an adult inmate, what quarter are they in. It's pretty simple. And then the JJDPA, there's a link that you will all have access to. There's the law, and then there's the supporting regulations. We're going to stay focused again on the federal laws, and the Welfare and Institution Code section 208 is not the only law, as you know, that deals with separation and age issues, and certainly with the SYTF facilities that we're looking at now in California. Before I get too far into this, we have to think about the terms juvenile and minor. We're going to use them interchangeably in this presentation because when we do federal compliance monitoring and then report to the federal government, we need to use their terms. They use the term juvenile. In our world, juvenile and minor are the same thing. They are a person that's under 18 years of age. So if you see juvenile and you see minor, just know that those two words are used interchangeably. When we talk about youth, that means any young person, and in this context, up to the age of 25. Just so people, if you see minor or juvenile, it's because we're trying to make sure we cover all of our bases and hit all of the laws. Again, you'll have links to all of these codes, because I know what everybody wants to do on Friday after this is read the JJDPA. It's riveting. So sight and sound contact, we talk about it all the time. What does it actually mean? These three pieces are taken from the federal law and from the federal regulation. The top level, the definition of sight and sound contact, and you can read it there. Any physical, clear visual, or verbal contact that is not brief and inadvertent. And when we go to technical assistance meetings or meetings of the compliance monitors from across the country, what the federal government gives us guidance on is that you can't have a message sent and a message received. So communication. So sometimes we talk about, a fence line. If there's a fence, a cyclone fence with, visual between an adult and a juvenile detention facility, and the occupants of those facilities can see each other, wave, hey Joe, how's it going? And the other person can say, oh, I'm great, how are you, Bob? That's sight or sound contact. Message sent, message received. The JJDPA also says, based on that definition, juveniles cannot be detained or confined in any institution in which they have sight or sound contact with adult inmates. It's pretty clear. And then the federal regulations go on to support and say that our state plan, so what BSCC does to monitor, has to ensure that there's no sustained sight and sound contact between juveniles and adult inmates. I don't want to get too much into what sustained means, because again, these definitions and these concepts also apply to a police department lockup. So they had to make some sort of exception for when a young person was brought in to be booked in an adult facility. And if there were an adult inmate in that same booking area, the staff have to do everything they can to make sure that those two individuals aren't spending sustained amount of time together to communicate. So that's why that term sustained comes in. It actually is something that can happen in police department facilities. It's also really important to note that the purpose of sight and sound separation, and this has been a tenet of the JJDPA since it was established in 1974, that the intent of sight and sound separation is to protect youth while they are in the juvenile justice system. Again, who adults are, who young people are, who adolescents are, all of those things have changed so much in recent years. I think the federal government is attempting to do their best to take into account that we are holding people in way different facilities than we were 10, 20, almost 50 years ago, but we are still working with those laws. And when we say this person cannot be in contact with this person, it's to meet the intent of that law, to protect that young person, not to drive you all crazy. I just wanted to point that out. So very simply, a juvenile or a minor, a young person who's under the jurisdiction of the juvenile court, and that's a really important distinction, cannot have contact with an adult inmate, a person who's over 18 and in the adult court. Now, if it were only that simple and a young person didn't have their feet in both courts, we would be golden, but we all know that's not the case. So we are going to do our best to try to find some of those nuances and explain them and tell you what we understand from the guidance given to us by the federal government. Again, juvenile and minor in this context in your facility is a person who is under 18 and under the jurisdiction of the juvenile court. That person must be separated from a person who's in the adult court and over 18. Somebody that's over 18 and in the custody of a juvenile detention facility and under the juvenile court, if they're 20 years old, they are not an adult inmate, and I'll explain why in a minute. So that is why those people can stay in contact with a young person under 18. So who is an adult inmate? Not to make fun of the people that write federal laws, but sometimes they start off really strong and then get really murky. So I'll try to put some of this into my own language and how I can explain and understand it best. An adult inmate is a person that's reached the age of full criminal responsibility under the state law, which is, we all know, is 18, and they've been arrested, they're in custody for, or they're awaiting trial on a criminal charge, or they've been convicted on an adult charge. And then again, there's always some exception. So it doesn't include people that were younger than the maximum age at which a youth can be held in a juvenile facility, or they were committed to the care and custody or supervision, including post-placement of a juvenile correctional agency by I'm not going to read the rest because it just kind of loses it. So we'll go on to explain that a little bit better. But the top part is the most important part to remember. In my words, it's a person who's over 18, they have been arrested for, or they're waiting trial for, or they've been convicted of an adult charge. Again, we all know it's not that simple, but that person, if you look at it simple, has to be separated from a young person under 18. Under 18, under the juvenile court. I'm going to say that again and again and again. There is an adult inmate decision tree that the federal government has put together. This is one of the handouts that we'll give to you. We've made our own that we think is a lot more helpful, but you'll have access to this tool that the feds came up with. So again, still leave some questions as to who may be an adult inmate. We'll get into some of those in the scenarios. But again, a person who's reached the age of full criminal responsibility, so they're 18, they've been arrested for, like that's the bottom line, or they've been convicted of or awaiting trial on that offense. Except a person that's younger than the state's maximum age at which they can be held, or they were committed to a juvenile facility. So again, that's a person that's under 18 in the adult court, and they are like, they had been, we don't we won't have that much anymore. They had been committed to DJJ under adult charges, or we'd be looking at those people in the SYTFs. So there's one exception, and those what ifs are much better explained by talking about continuous stay. Some of you have heard of this. We've talked about this. We've shared guidance with your facilities about this. And this became super important many years ago. We dealt with a lot of these issues in DJJ 10 and 15 years ago when we would inspect those facilities, and they lump all of their every age and every court of jurisdiction populations together. So this is not a state exception. This is a federal exception. Again, we monitor your facilities for the federal laws for these, for the core requirement of separation. So if a person is in your facility, they are under the jurisdiction of the adult court, and this is going to happen, and they turn 18 while they are in your facility, they can stay. They don't hit up against that definition of an adult inmate until they leave. That's why it's called continuous stay. And that is why, because of this guidance, that is why a young person can theoretically stay in your facility until they turn 25, even though they've been convicted or they're being held under the adult court. Now, I do want to point out, and we're going to say a lot in these scenarios, and you've probably heard us say before, talk to your county council when some of these, when state and federal law kind of come up against one another, because this exception does not say that you have to keep that person in your facility once they turn 18. Now there's all that, you know, recent changes to WIC 208.5 that we're all looking at. Again, we can't interpret that as the BSCC. But I just want to point out, and it's a conversation we've had with many people, just because this continuous stay exception is there, the law is not saying you have to. So I just want to make sure that's that's clear. You know, it's intended to, if I could, you know, think about what the federal government was thinking when they finally came up with this exception, because it's recent and it made life a lot easier in DJJ when they finally made this exception. If a person's getting programming and it makes sense, and it makes sense to keep them in contact with the young people because they're getting the same programming, it's beneficial to them to stay there. So that's the intent of that continuous stay exception.
Allison,
Yes.
this is Rosie. Will one of your scenarios kind of have one of these be covering this one?
So sort of,
Okay.
but we can come up with one that deals with it. And maybe we can ask a question. I think you all did a really good job. I don't want to do a spoiler alert. You all did a really good job of submitting scenarios where the outcome is very similar across the board. But what we can do is explain why you can't use the continuous stay.
Okay, I don't want to take us backwards, so.
Oh yeah, no, and yeah, well, we can definitely, it comes up. There is so much that goes into it, you know, and I love to say, you know, this is the simplest slide that I have up there, but we all know it's not that simple. So again, please ask us questions. You're really good at coming up with scenarios. Sometimes I'm just like, oh, I really hope that actually didn't happen, but I'm afraid that some of them do, and we're going to do our very best to help you out in those scenarios. Again, just a reminder, juvenile offender under 18, juvenile court can't be in contact with an adult inmate. We went over that definition. Over 18 in the adult court. So this is another piece of, I almost said paper, but you're going to get it in your email. This is another chart that you'll be getting from us. It's been handed out in the past. We might make a couple of tweaks to it, but this is BSCC's chart on separation. So when does somebody need to be separated from minors? And we really tried to use this in our scenarios and see if we need to change anything in this based on our scenarios. Again, we are learning all of this along with you as we walk through these new types of facilities in our state. So if you see any inconsistencies or you have questions, please reach out to us and we'll figure it out together. So, and again, you're going to have a copy of this. Adult court, if a person is in the adult court, they turn 18 while they are in your facility, you do not need to separate them from the minors in the juvenile court. If they're brought to a facility after they turn 18 and they're in the adult court, they need to be separated from the minors. If they're over 18, they're in the adult court, and this is what deals with this continuous stay. They're transferred out of your facility to the jail for one reason or another. And one of those scenarios includes if a young person is charged with a crime while they're in the facility, perhaps, you know, it was an assault or something else, and they're transferred to the jail to deal with that adult charge. That breaks the continuous stay. They cannot come back to your facility because they are now an adult inmate. They've been arrested for awaiting trial, probably not been convicted, but they need to be separated from minors. This one is tricky, and we were talking about this right up to the time we talked. If a person leaves the juvenile facility, they're in adult court, over or under 18, they leave the facility, they go to juvenile court. I think that's the easiest way to say it. They stay on a juvenile matter. They can absolutely come back to the facility so long as they don't go to an adult detention facility. So this is kind of wacky because it's a person with dual, you have adult charges and you have juvenile charges, but perhaps they need to leave the facility to go to court on that juvenile charge, even though they're staying in your facility because the adult charge, as long as they don't go to the jail, they can come back and not break that continuous stay. Rule of thumb is when they leave your facility and touch the adult facility, they become an adult inmate and need to be separated from the minors. And then this last one, 18 years or older while in custody in your facility, in a juvenile facility, they commit a new offense, filed and proceeds through the adult court, they need to be separated from the minors in your jail. Again, these are California words applied to the federal laws, which are not always super clear, but hopefully this is helpful enough to initially address some of the scenarios that you've come up with or you may see in the future. But again, we're here to help answer those questions. That is the part of the job of our compliance monitoring team.
So Allison, we got a question in the chat, but also I wanted to ask a question on this last box where you state it's 18 years or older and while in custody commits a new criminal offense. I'm assuming that's going to be in the juvenile facility, and it gets filed in adult court, but they never go to an adult facility. They still have to be separated?
Yes. So if you go back to, let's see if I can do this. Oh, if you go back to the adult inmate, it's as simple, it's not simple, but once they are arrested, and the federal government has given really clear guidance on that, if they're arrested on a juvenile charge, at any point, and they remain in custody, then they become an adult inmate.
Okay, it seems, and maybe I just need to spend more time reading it, but it seems the opposite of what's said in one of the earlier boxes. So it's okay.
And it's totally fair because this is really complex. And many years ago, we never envisioned having this much nuance in there. So it's possible that we can read this together and find something.
Yeah, and we got a question in the chat from Mila, but I think this is one of your scenarios, if I recall, that were sent over, but it's about a young person on probation in the community when they turn 18, commit a crime prior to the 18th birthday, but are arrested after their 18th birthday. So that's part of it. At the time of their arrest, they're also arrested for an adult crime, and the youth is committed to an SYTF for the juvenile matter, but still in custody in county jail on the adult matter.
Yes.
Separated.
Yes. And that's a really tricky one. I mean, again, I would not have been able to make these scenarios up on my own. And you know, you'd have to sit and pull that apart a little bit, but the bottom line is that person was arrested for an adult crime after, like, as an adult. And so they hit that definition of an adult inmate. Again, thinking about, again, it's not the BSCC making things up to drive people crazy. The federal law and the guidance they give us is clear about that.
Okay. And there is another question. What if they are, I think OR'd is own reconnaissance on the adult case, never remanded on the adult case?
You know, I'm gonna look to my colleagues. That term arrested, I believe, unfortunately, taints them as an adult. Taints is the wrong word, but they become that adult inmate. And the federal government, the guidance that they've been giving in the last few years has been clear about that. It was not always that clear. And so I will point out that if you had asked some of these questions 5 years ago, the answer would not be the same. And I realize that that's super frustrating. But that is the guidance we're getting from the federal government. And I'm just gonna, Ginger can give me a thumbs up if that sounds about right. Once they're arrested, they become the adult inmate.
That's correct, Allison. Anyone who's been arrested for, is awaiting trial on, or who has been convicted of a criminal offense is considered to be an adult.
Yeah. So even though the case goes away, so to speak, because they have that contact with the adult system, they have to be separated from the minor. It's rough. We're definitely not gonna lie about the difficulty of this. And I see the question about the last box speaking to filing while the other box speak to arrests. And you're correct. We could probably clean that up a little bit to match the federal more. So we'll make a note of that. That's a really good point. Thank you. Any other questions?
I don't see any hands raised or new ones in the chat, so I think we're good to go.
And we'll definitely take a closer look at this, and we'll let you know. Yes, it complicates. Well, it doesn't complicate what WIC 208.5, and I'm going to say this as private citizen Allison, I find WIC 208 super complicated. I am not an attorney, but attempting to overlay WIC 208.5 on the federal law will drive you right up a tree. It is, you cannot draw clear lines between the two. And that's why we'll say a lot of the time, if you have questions about age, who can be separated and in contact with respect to the state law, contact your county council. I know that's not the best answer in the world, but we're not attorneys and we're not authorized. We don't have the jurisdiction to interpret the state law. But I definitely agree that it's complicated. And I have my chat box up now so I can see the questions. I didn't see them earlier. Still not used to Zoom after 3 years. So let's look at that same scenario, if a person is under the juvenile court, when do they need to be separated from a minor? If the person is under the jurisdiction of the juvenile court, anytime they're brought into the facility on a juvenile matter, including probation violations or outstanding warrants, if they remain in the facility on that juvenile matter, they don't have the threat of the adult court on them, separation is not required. I could say it simpler in that if a person is 17, 18, 19, 20, goes up to 24, they don't need to be separated from a person under 18. So juvenile court, young people can all hang out together. Again, the state law says you can't hold them past 25, but that's a whole nother story for another webinar. But people under the jurisdiction of the juvenile court can stay in contact with one another with no separation. So a person, and this is sort of one of the scenarios and maybe something similar to what was asked above, if they are on juvenile probation, they're arrested for an adult offense, they're over 18, and they're brought into custody on an adult matter. And this is so much more complex than a couple words in a box. But once they are picked up or arrested on that adult offense, they can't be brought back to the juvenile facility and have contact with minors.
Allison, I have a question for you. This
Sure.
is Victoria.
Sure. And I see
So-
Emily has their hand up as well.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay, go ahead.
Okay, so if a juvenile's on probation and he gets released from juvenile hall, he's ordered on probation for however long, but he's 18, 19 years old, goes out, commits a new violation, they're going to take him to the adult jail, correct?
Correct.
And then let's say the judge orders him, once he gets his time, judge orders him to come back to juvenile hall to do his time. Would that juvenile still need to be segregated from the younger kids?
Was it a juvenile probation violation?
No. So it would have been juvenile probation already,
Mhm.
got out, did an adult crime, went to OCJ, spent some time there, got his time really quick, got his commitment. But the judge says, okay, well, you were on juvenile probation. I'm going to send you back to juvenile hall to finish your adult. No, you're shaking your head. Okay.
Nope. Because they turned 18
Uh-huh.
and were involved with another offense, they become an adult inmate, unfortunately. And I know
Okay.
these are not like yay answers, but they're answers that we are really getting, I would say uncomfortable, but we're getting comfortable with answering.
Well, it's just very confusing because I know right
Yes.
now we're having kids come in transfers from OCJ, and we're already trying to figure out if they're the SB 823 kids, youth, whatever we want to call them. I mean, that's difficult in itself. And I mean, we were getting, I have a kid, he committed crime at 16 supposedly. Anyway, he's 22 years old and he's at juvenile hall.
Mhm.
So how would that work?
So he was 16.
According, I didn't
he-
look into his case. He told
Yeah.
me he was 16 when he committed this crime and they brought him back at 22. But let's just say that's true.
Well, I think it's super tricky. And we're always going to say, oh, we need a little bit more information about that, because again, what I don't feel comfortable talking about is, you know, when that distinction's made to
Yeah.
turn him into a, this is a oversimplification,
Yeah.
into a SB 823 kid. The hard part is that if they meet the criteria of that adult inmate, they've been arrested or they've been convicted of an adult crime,
Yeah.
they need to be, and they're over 18, they need to be separated from the minors, from the people under 18 in that facility. And that's
Okay.
another important distinction. You know, when they're over 18, they're not minors anymore. So
Right.
I believe, you know, as we, I mean, I don't know what I believe anymore sometimes, but I believe as, you know, as these facilities come up off the ground and hopefully it becomes clear to the courts and to the attorneys, you know, who goes down what path, that you'll have a better idea of who's coming into your facility. I think right now it's just all happening so fast. And
Yeah,
it is so confusing. So we're going to keep doing our best to go over the federal laws. And if I haven't said this already, the pain that we went through with DJJ, God, it was 2007. That was a really long time ago.
Yeah.
I mean, we blew up some of those facilities because for so many years they had been, keeping these populations together. So it's like the
Okay.
opposite of that. Now we have to figure out who to keep separate in your SYTFs. I
Okay.
really do hope that we can stay in communication, and Ginger and Tamika, they talk to our federal partners. So oftentimes they'll bring these scenarios just to double check and say, okay, we have this huge sea change in California. How do we deal with the federal law that hasn't changed and yet our laws have? Tricky part is the feds say you have to follow the federal law if you want your Title II funds.
Yeah.
So.
All right.
So-
Thank you. I know it's confusing. Thank you though.
Sure. And go ahead, Rosie. And then we have Emily too.
Yeah, I was just gonna do a time check because we have about 45 minutes. And I think there's 8 scenarios, so I think hopefully that will address a lot of the questions, but certainly I'm not trying to stop anyone from asking a question, but wanted to advise you, Allison.
Okay.
And then we'll go to Emily's question, and then if needed, we can always schedule a subsequent convening with the BSCC, so we can definitely talk more, because I know we could probably talk about this all day, or but just wanted to do that time check for you, Allison. So Emily, go for it.
Okay, thank you. Maybe you'll cover this then, but just going back to 208.5. Because 208.5 does state that a juvenile who has a case that's originated in juvenile court shall remain in a juvenile facility until they're 25. Even if they pick up a new adult case, say they get in a fight in the institutions, it's bad enough to go through the adult court process, they still have that juvenile case where 208.5 says we have to keep them in a juvenile facility unless we petition the court. So now, are we also going to have to petition the court for these youth that perhaps pick up an adult case or, touch the adult county jail system for any reason every single time? Because that's the way 208.5 reads.
Well, it's going to be up to, so I can't speak to whether or not you're going to petition the court, but certainly if the federal laws are applied, that person would need to be separated. The group of people that we have not talked with are the courts and some of the DAs, and I don't know how to separate sometimes the stickiness of the state and federal law, because I'm with you. It would be so simple if the person just stayed in juvenile court and nothing else happened, because they can, turn 18, 19, 20, they can stay in the facility, they can stay in contact. Once they turn 20, I mean, they can technically have contact with an adult inmate because they're over 18. Again, it's gonna, bear out in different ways as these facilities, as young people go into these facilities. Knowing when you can and can't separate, hopefully is going to be helpful. But I get it. I mean, I think it's terrible when there's a young person, and this happens all the time, and the county's like, okay, I have this person and they are all alone in this unit. This is absolutely ridiculous. I agree 250,000%. And that's where somebody in the county council needs to be involved. And again, we can't say, oh, that person would be better off in an adult facility, because that's not always the case either. But we really do recognize those issues.
Okay.
Our charge, right, in this compliance monitoring is to make sure that the right people are separated. I have a really good feeling that we'll talk about this again in the not too distant not too distant future. I wanted to address the question because it's a super easy question. If they're under the adult court jurisdiction and they have a continuous stay and they stay in your facility, they get the Title 15, the juvenile detention Title 15 standards. It's not pick and choose. They get the Title 15 for the facility they're in. Hopefully that helps. Okay, I think I did this. Whoops, now I gotta go on the right screen and click the right button. This is just, what if I have an adult inmate in my juvenile facility? And I know this happens, again, this is gonna apply to the young people that aren't in continuous stay status, that they've, I mean, really, if they're in your facility on a juvenile matter or an adult matter, it's continuous stay, it hasn't been a new offense. You need to have mechanisms, practices, policies in place to maintain that sight and sound separation, mechanisms, architectural designs, walls, things like that, separate spaces, time phasing, and you can't program adult inmates and juveniles together. And again, back in the day, that was an issue in DJJ with some of their specialized programs, because they were kids that were in the same behavioral modification program, and one was 17 and one was 18. And why couldn't they be programmed together? Because of the federal law. And do you see how I keep saying it's the federal law? It's not the BSCC's brilliant idea. We're monitoring for the federal law. So we do have, I have 13 scenarios. We're going to do our best to read them and go through them. We'll take, I don't know that we'll have time, but if somebody wants to add something or add another question to what we talk about, please feel free. I'm going to ask for a little bit of grace. We took your scenarios and put them a little bit into our own words to have them answer the question in a logical sense. And like I said, we're not attorneys. We have support of 2 attorneys in the compliance monitoring program. They're not full-time assigned to us, but they are there for a backstop. If you see a problem with these scenarios, or you just don't agree with our interpretation, please give me a call. Let's talk it out. Like we make mistakes from time to time, and sometimes we overlook things. So please let us know. If you're comfortable, if one of these is your scenarios and you want to read your scenario, just again, holler, and I'm more than happy to take a break from talking and let you do the talking too. See, there's a question in there. I'll go through the scenarios and I'll try to pull that out and read it more carefully. And if not, I'll make a copy of that question and try to answer it later. So separation scenarios. So I think this is related to, some of them all have elements of one or the other. So a person on juvenile probation, they turn 18 while they're in the community. They're arrested after they're 18 on an adult offense, on a new offense. They're booked into the adult jail, post bail the following day, and then get a new court date, or get a court date for that. This young person subsequently violates their juvenile probation. They're taken into custody at a juvenile facility. They're ordered to stay 90 days on the juvenile matter. Unfortunately, they are an adult inmate. Again, if you go back to the very narrow definition in the federal law, arrested for, convicted of, awaiting trial for an adult offense, that person does need to be separated from young people under 18. Young people under 18 in the juvenile court. Does anybody have any questions about that?
Not seeing any in the chat, so.
I read the question really quickly in the chat about an exception from JJDPA. California has made laws that are so much more restrictive than the JJDPA. I've been working with the JJDPA for about 25 years in another state and in California. I've never seen laws as complicated as the ones in California that deal with the same issues. And it's really a challenge. It's really a challenge for compliance monitoring because we understand how the facilities work and that we have other laws, but there are no exceptions to the JJDPA. And if we have violations of the JJDPA, the entire state is at risk of losing that Title II grant funding. Totally understand the frustration with that. JJDPA in California are completely out of step with one another, especially when WIC 208.5 revisions hit. I wanted to run screaming from the building. I couldn't make it work. I think Rosie and I talked a little bit about it. I'm like, I can't make this work.
Yeah. And Allison, I think what might makes them the most sense, so we get through at least as many scenarios as we can before the 3 o'clock hour, is maybe go through all the scenarios. And then we have a weekly call with probation departments specific to 823, which I know this is not just specific to SYTS, but maybe we could have you back and have just a Q&A session too.
Oh, sure.
And that might make the most sense that way, because I suspect a lot of the questions that we'll get will hopefully be addressed in the scenarios. And then if there's follow-up, we can, which I'm sure there will be, invite you to come back and your team.
That might be helpful. Yeah, I'll try to talk. I'll try to talk quick. And again, if somebody wants to say, oh, this is mine, I want to tell you really quick, please, please, please feel free. And I know people can get the recording. I'm also going to send, at the end of this, I'm going to send the PowerPoint to everybody, and you should be able to get the hyperlinks as well. Okay, so scenario number 1 out of 13 done. Some of them are more simple than others. An 18-year-old individual is booked into a county jail for 2 counts of 187, ordered remanded to the county jail by the adult court. The DA identifies that 1 count occurred before the person turned 18, so they are arraigned in juvenile court, and the juvenile judge orders the individual detained in juvenile hall. So, because that young person had one of those charges, again, some of them we took a little bit of creative liberty to. We're assuming that one of those charges were after they were 18, so they were charged as an adult. If they're proceeding through adult and juvenile court at the same time, the adult case will knock out the juvenile case in terms of being an adult inmate. So that person would be an adult inmate, and they need separation. So number 3, again, anybody recognizes anything, feel free. 18-year-old individual released from a juvenile facility, placed on juvenile probation. Following a search of their residence, they're arrested and booked into jail. When you hear jail, you just think adult inmate. I mean, I think it's fair to say. For the purposes of separation. They're booked into jail on adult charges for possession of illegal weapons. The adult DA, fearing for the individual's safety at the jail, requests housing at the juvenile hall. This happens and has happened so much more in recent years, where somebody is trying to take that young person maybe because of adolescent brain development research and put them in the juvenile detention facility. They are an adult inmate. They were arrested after they were 18 and booked into the adult jail on that charge. They can't simply be housed, and this is in the federal law as well. There's so much more complexity. You cannot take an adult inmate and put them in the juvenile hall for any reason, even if it would make sense to keep them safe there. And this has happened, and I've talked to some of you and some of your partners about this happening in live real time at your facilities. So in this scenario, probation argued that housing that young person would be a hardship due to sight and sound separation requirements. It wouldn't be positive, and so the DA relented and released that person on community supervision. Again, sometimes I don't know if I'm giving you good answers by saying, yes, that person needs separation, which would then lead you. We can't tell you, but you might make the decision in your agency. Then we need to petition or do whatever we need to get this person out. Hopefully there's understanding in the courts about that. But again, I know these aren't always the best questions for us to answer, but they would be an adult inmate. And luckily in this scenario, the person didn't end up in the juvenile facility. Again, the intent of this law, these laws are to protect the young people in the juvenile justice system, which is why the law is attempting to keep them away from adult inmates. So 18-year-old, also, if I mess up one of your scenarios, you can send me a private note. An 18-year-old individual released from DJJ earlier this year and then arrested on 2 new charges. Person is booked into county jail, they bail out. They also violated their juvenile probation. They fail to appear in court. They have a warrant. They get arrested at county jail pending a new law violation with the juvenile matter trailing. If they are transferred back to the facility, do they need to be separated? Yes, because they spent time in jail after they were 18. They become the adult inmate. A 19-year-old assaults 2 officers at DJJ. They're transported to the county jail from DJJ. While in jail, the attorney argues that he could be housed at juvenile hall because he was under 25. Adult court judge made that order. Again, this is conflict with Welfare and Institutions Code, section 205, which again, I am not an attorney, but that applies to juvenile charges. And it sounds like this is a little bit of crossover because that person is picked up on, I assume that person is picked up on adult charges for that assault. So they are an adult inmate. You're going to see a pattern here. And they do need to be separated. Even if they came back to the juvenile facility to deal with that juvenile matter, if that makes sense. A person who's arrested as an adult spent time in a county jail and they are sent to the jail after that time is done. I'm making an assumption. And then they go to the juvenile facility for a different juvenile offense. They are an adult inmate. We'd probably ask for more information because we don't know much about this scenario, but I think we could make an assumption that they were 18 when they were arrested. They were probably on juvenile probation, even though maybe they violated their juvenile probation at the same time or a different time as that criminal charge. The adult charge is higher than the juvenile and they become the adult inmate. Person who's we need a lot more information. And again, I hope whoever submitted some of these can maybe help out or again reach us after. A person who's 23 or older, they're arrested for an offense committed prior to them turning 18. For example, a 35-year-old is accused of murder that occurred at the age of 16. Now, this has happened. I mean, these things have happened. Are they an adult inmate or a juvenile? We need a lot more information. We don't know the circumstances of that. We don't know if once they are arrested for something that happened when they were 16, are they going to move through the adult court or are they going to move through the juvenile court? I think about that case. I think it was in, it was a Michael Skakel out in Massachusetts. He was arrested for the murder of his neighbor when he was, I think, in his 40s. I don't remember the outcome of that, but interesting story and deals with a lot of the same stuff. we're so nerdy with this federal law stuff that when we see stuff like that in the news, we start thinking about, oh my heavens, are they adult inmate or a juvenile? So a 23-year-old, their offense is committed before they're 18. They end up going through the juvenile court. They're theoretically not an adult inmate. Now, if whatever happens, once they're arrested, they end up proceeding through the adult court, they would need to be separated because they've turned 18. They didn't do a continuous stay, so they need to be separated from the minors in the facility. But again, we know that we couldn't put a 35-year-old in our facility because of WIC 208.5, and I hope this doesn't happen.
So Allison, could I ask a question? Because I think
course.
earlier the BSCC was not really opining if there was a hard cap on the age that a young person, or in this case, the asterisk that you have a 35-year-old could be in our facilities. And so has the thinking around that changed?
So it's in conflict with state law. I mean, you couldn't do it. That is a really good example of where the state law would overrule the federal law. You know, somebody could argue, well, the federal law has no age limit. So theoretically, a 35-year-old could be in a juvenile detention facility, but you'd be in conflict with the state law. So presumably your county council would be involved in figuring that particular scenario out.
Right, but I guess my question is, before, I didn't think that the BSCC was opining like a hard, but is there something, because we've had this with and not to take us too far off topic, because so maybe it's something we can just flag and talk about more offline and bring back, that for like the 1391 cases that were coming back, that, you know, if the individual was 40, and so far majority have not been ordered into the juvenile facility, but there wasn't clear saying, no, you can't.
So we can't. I mean, there's nothing in the federal law, but I'm not comfortable saying, oh, you're fine because the federal law doesn't say it. I'm gonna continue to say that we're not gonna opine. I mean, private citizen Allison is going to say, my read of the law tells me you can't hold them until 25, but I believe there are some even larger issues with that law as well. So I think it should be flagged. And again, I don't know that BSCC would ever be the body to say such a thing. I'm just, you know, my plain reading of the law is that you couldn't do it. But again, that's not BSCC Allison, that's other Allison.
Right, and the reason why it raised the flag for me is just because it says here that they could not be housed, and so I thought that was more definitive statement, so which I think everyone would welcome.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase that from our PowerPoint because I don't want it to look like we're making that opinion. So you don't see that.
Would be welcome though if you could.
Strike that from the record. That will not be on the PowerPoint we send out.
And then I still want to go back offline too and talk about the 23-year-old whose offense was committed before age 18 and proceeded through adult court, because I think maybe there's some clarification on a chart that we could do or something, because for me, I think it just doesn't seem as clear. But I also don't want to delay us more, so
we've definitely
sorry.
That's why I'm glad Ginger and Tamika are here too, because they, you know, that's why we have a team.
Yes.
Okay, so slide number 7 never happened. Scenario number 8, an adult with adult charges, but also with juvenile charges. And again, remember, we did our best with your scenario. So if they seem repetitive or we use different words, please just let us know and just let us know. Okay, a 20-year-old person charged with sex offenses that occurred both before and after they turned 18. They're booked into the jail, eligible for release on the adult charges, but then sent from the jail to the juvenile facility to be held in custody on the juvenile charges. So they are going to need to be separated. They are an adult inmate. In this scenario, I mean, my assumption is that they're being held at the jail, transferred to the juvenile hall. I mean, I'm sorry, it says it right there, that they've been released. So they are released from jail and go right to the juvenile hall. They would need to be separated. They've become an adult inmate because they did time in an adult facility. Number 9, person in a juvenile facility, 18, commits a new law violation while in custody, assault. New violation becomes under the adult court because they were 18 when this happened. If the matter is submitted to the DA and it gets filed, would that filing necessitate a sight and sound separation? What if the individual is convicted, but stays at the juvenile facility on their old juvenile matter? So, I think somebody pointed out, we have the term filing in that separation chart, but I want to always go back to the federal definition. Once they're arrested after they're 18, they are an adult inmate. So that continuous stay is technically broken because they become an adult inmate by nature of them committing a new offense. That's something I think I might not have said it clearly, but that's something I was thinking later. If these young people just stay on that juvenile track and don't commit any other offenses that make them an adult inmate, then life would be a lot simpler. Now, I know that's asking a whole lot and it's not real life. But that's what complicates it. Once they turn 18, there's other implications. So yes, they would need to be separated because they are an adult inmate. Okay, 17-year-old commits a serious offense and the charges are filed as a juvenile. Oh, this is a really interesting one. I want to know if this one really happened. You can email me privately. A 17-year-old person commits a serious offense and charges are filed as a juvenile. They fail. Oh, it did. Thank you. They fail to appear at the initial hearing and a warrant is issued. They move out of state, turn 18, arrested and convicted, I assume out of state on a low level offense. And I think that's an important distinction in that scenario, is that the juvenile offense seemed to be more serious. Juvenile warrant comes up and we're contacted by the out-of-state jail, work with interstate compact to bring the young person back. The California juvenile charges are too serious to recommend release. The individual must be held at a juvenile facility. And we would argue that that person is an adult inmate because they came from a jail, even though they came from another state, they are still an adult inmate. You can't go from a jail to a juvenile hall according to the federal law. Again, I realize this isn't the answer that people are looking for. And maybe our next scenario, our next webinar is, how to figure out how to deal with these issues. I would love to hear, and we've heard some of it, but maybe hearing in one place what people have done. And again, we can't suggest, nor would we ever recommend that, oh, these people should probably be sent to this type of facility or sent to an adult facility. But it would be interesting to hear what courts are doing in particular counties, because I know it's been rough out there. And there are plenty of judges that throw the federal law, or don't know about the federal laws of separation, and do what they think is in the best interests of that person as well.
Bill?
Hi, Allison, Rosie. Not to hang out on this scenario too long, but it is ours. We're dealing with it right now, and this is just more. We have the person separated, but our district attorney was compelled to go Prop 57 on this case because this would be a secure track eligible offense, but we cannot provide rehabilitative services in a sight and sound situation for that period of time. And so it's unfortunate for the person because they would otherwise be very suitable to stay on the juvenile side of the fence. So yeah, just wanted to say that.
It's horrible. I agree. I see where that's really difficult. I want to pick a topic next time that's a lot more positive with our answers. I don't have to think about that.
Yeah, but I mean, it's really, I do appreciate your time, Allison, because I know there's a lot of questions.
Oh my
on this,
goodness.
so.
I think we can get through the next. There's only 2 more. I can go through this really quickly, or I can just pause if people want to take 15 minutes for questions and answers. You are going to get these. We're going to send them out to all of you. Is that would that be ideal? We can pause on these and see if anybody has any questions that they want to talk through.
Yeah, we can pause, and if there are questions, we can take them. If not, then we can keep going. There was another scenario. I know we still have 3, a couple other scenarios to go through, but does anyone have any follow-up questions? Oh, and Emily had a question from earlier that I think we missed. Do young people who are considered adult inmates and return to the juvenile facility need to have sight and sound separation from other 18-year-old people in the facility who have turned 18 while in the facility and have had continuous stay?
Can you say that again?
So it says, do young people who are considered adult inmates and return to the juvenile facility need to have sight and sound separation from other 18 and over young people in the facility who have turned 18 while in the facility and have had a continuous stay? So other 18-year-olds who have stayed in the juvenile court system are over 18.
My understanding, and I'm going to see Ginger confirm that once they're 18, the person in the juvenile court, they can be in contact with other 18-year-olds regardless of the court of conviction. Ginger?
That's correct.
So that's a good answer. And again, I don't know, it's all going to bear out as these facilities are populated. You know, are we going to get more young people over 18 to where, again, at DJJ, they had more young people. They were able to you know, clump those over 18s together in a way that made sense. Again, completely different situation. You know, there's many more SYTFs than there were DJJ facilities. So that's somewhat helpful if that young person is going to remain in your facility.
Other questions?
I see, Emily, I really like your questions. The trigger is arrested, correct, as an adult or an adult filing of a complaint. Yeah, theoretically, you know, it doesn't say filing in that federal law, but the definition of an adult inmate does say arrested or is awaiting trial or convicted of. So theoretically, once they're arrested, unless everything, I don't even want to say the rest. I'm just going to pause there. The question about mixing adult and juvenile, as long as everyone in the SYTF is over 18, that is correct. That is correct. And a staff arresting an 18-year-old is a ticket to adult jail. You know, it makes me makes me feel terrible to say yes. Theoretically, yes, if the person is arrested in your facility once they've turned 18, they need to be sight and sound separated, or they need to be transferred to the jail, which is not something that we're going to recommend, and which is not something that your agency is always going to want to recommend. or do, or maybe sometimes you do. Maybe this will be helpful every once in a while, but I don't know that it will be. I can and can't wait for the next 5 years to look to look in retrospect and see what all of these law changes, what effect they had on our populations. It's going to be interesting. That's good news. Yes, good news. Thank you. I was going for that, especially on a Friday. The conviction standard refers to misdemeanor crimes or higher. I don't quite, I think so. I think once they're convicted of an adult crime, to me, I don't think it matters what the offense was. I think it's just being convicted in adult court for that offense. Does that help or make sense? Am I answering the question? Excellent.
So I think if there aren't, we could probably go do one more scenario, or maybe we could do two, depending.
I have a question. I'm going to read it. I'm a speed reader.
Okay.
Questions about clients who are housed in a facility, 18 originally detained at county jail, remanded to juvenile custody because the offense occurred prior to their 18th birthday. Okay, so both clients have hearings on the same day, one a juvenile. Can they be transported together? So, Ginger and Tamika, back me up. These standards apply to facilities. And I will put a period at the end of that sentence. The federal law does not reach further than the walls of the facilities. I don't know if that's helpful or detrimental, but that's, you know, we've been asked that question in the past related to bringing people to places once they're from the police department after arrest. Federal laws don't apply in the car.
And I
Youth
posted another question in the chat.
Yeah, committed to DJJ. Oh, I think, let me see if this is the one. Is this the same one?
Yeah, you might have it.
Is this it? So I'll read the one in the chat. A person committed to DJJ sent to DAI to serve adult time and then returns to DJJ to serve the remainder of their DJJ commitment is now being returned to the county. So the same thing would apply. They would need to be separated at DJJ as well. It's not not that that's helpful, but yes, they are an adult inmate. You can't go backwards. And I don't know if that's exactly the same as 13. I'll read that out loud. Committed to DJJ, assault staff, convicted in adult court, transferred to DAI to serve adult time. Yeah, it seems like it's the same.
I think it's the same.
Yeah.
And someone, we have a question from Christy that I guess we did not get to. So I'm trying to
Christy, I'm sorry. I don't see it up there. Where is it? Oh, there it is. Okay. Christy, 22-year-old arrested for sexual assault, booked into jail for 3 days. During the adult, this is a good one. During the adult court process, it was discovered that the offense took place when he was 16 years old, and the case is now in the juvenile court. He is being, this is a good one. I think part of me wants to talk with Ginger and Tamika outside of this room before we answer it, because I have an idea, unless Ginger, you want to say it.
I would say we would need more information.
Yeah. I will tell you that, and I promise let me chop that out of the chat and dump it into a file here. Let's see, I will say that if in the adult facilities, if a young person comes in and they're arrested and they say, I'm 22, and they're held in a cell with many, many adult people. So this is in a police department. This is some older guidance. And then 3 hours later, no, 7 hours later, because a minor can only be held, they need to be separated, but they can't be held with adults in a jail cell. 7 hours go by and the kid's like, I lied, here's my license, I'm really 15. The law allows for that not to be a violation. So I don't know if we can apply that same scenario to that situation, but we're gonna do our very best to do so. And I can't copy it. I can't do.
Oh, I can send it to you.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't want to lose it.
Yeah,
and
and
I
then we can send the answer out to everybody.
Yeah, Allison, that example that you just shared about the identity or the age of someone being unknown, I don't think that would apply to this, because that has to do with not knowing the actual identity of the person.
Yeah, it was the closest I could come up with, but we'll put our heads together and get back to you on that one. We, a lot of times when we bring scenarios to the federal government, they say, use your laws and figure it out. And sometimes they'll say, oh, this fits really neatly into this piece of guidance. So we'll think about it and put our heads together, and if need be, reach out to our federal partners. I see, Julie, I have a question similar to 13. Okay, so that is 18-year-old assaults staff at DJJ. They are sent to prison on the case. They finish the sentence and then completes re-entry for DJJ case. Then they're arrested on another fresh charge as an adult. They post bail and then brought to YDF for juvenile hold. I mean, I would say absolutely they're an adult inmate, like 2 times over. That's a rough one. They would need to be separated.
So, Allison, we could probably, as we stated earlier, talk for hours on these with these scenarios. And so I really do, appreciate your time. And I know at the very end you had put the contact information, although I'm sure everyone knows how to get in touch with the BSCC for follow-up questions, because some of this, it really appears that you really have to walk through each case. And so sometimes, well, much of it is not really very clear.
Yeah.
And so being able to walk through individual circumstances, with you and your staff is likely how some of these will just continue to go, so that
Yes,
probation can
please.
ensure that we're, doing what is as clear as possible to do, minus, the whatever a judge may order. But really do appreciate your time this afternoon on, I know, what is very, very complex topic for all of us. And so want to thank you and your partnership, and we'll send this out once we have the recording uploaded so everyone has it. And then I also know that Allison will be sending us some information that we can send out to all of you. And so just want to thank you and your team for your time and energy putting the PowerPoint together and being with us this afternoon. And I know we'll be talking more, so thank you.
Thank you all. And I like the idea of figuring things out together. So we'll definitely be talking with Rosie about that. Thank you.
All right, take care, everyone. Thank you again.